Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how my dad and sister built me this shed. So to start off, they went to Lowe's to go check out their sheds to kind of get an idea about how to make one since they've never made anything of this scale. They do have a do-it-yourself kit, and if you have the space, this might be easier and cheaper. The smallest shed that they offered, which was still too big for our space, was nearly $900, and the total that my dad and sister spent was under $500. Home Depot also offers sheds, although their prices are nearly double. Their starting price was $2,800 and it was for the base model of their smallest shed. This is the space that they're working with. As you can see, it is quite small. It's 63 inches long and 43 inches wide. This project took about 2 weeks to complete and multiple stops at the store. Here on the screen, you can see all of the products, the quantity, and also the pricing. Just the materials of the shed came out to $400. But including the jigsaw, it came out to $490. To start off, my dad is making the foundation, which again is 63 inches long and 43 inches wide. My dad does struggle a bit to put in the nails, but it's probably because we didn't have the proper tools. Since this project was a one-time thing, we didn't find it to be worth buying the exact equipment that was needed. We just really wanted to work with what we had and tried to make the most of it. As you can see, it was a little bit uneven. At first we weren't sure where that was coming from, but we found out that it was coming from the front, so that had to be lifted up. They decided to fix it by putting down some mulch underneath the base. They didn't like that, however, because it wasn't as secure, so my dad took out the foundation and dug up some soil to make everything even. Every piece of sheathing that you see is pre-cut by Lowe's at no extra cost. That bush starts to become a nuisance and is slowly removed bit by bit. At the very end, it's removed completely and replaced by something else. So here my dad is starting the back wall, but for you guys to better understand me, I want to talk about this mock-up that I did, just so that I can better explain what's going on. So he's doing this middle image right here. That gap that you guys see under the 5-inch lumber does not exist. I did that to illustrate that they are different lumbers, and those were added on because the shed is going to be at an incline. Here I'm showing you the side profile so that you guys can get a better understanding of what I mean by going at an incline. This is to help with rain flow, and although we don't get much rain here, they did this as a precautionary measure. Here is the end result. All that is left to do is add the sheathing. The sheathing ended up being a little bit bent, and that made everything uneven and hard to work with. We're still not sure why or how that happened, but my dad decided to call it a day and flattened it out, put some cement blocks on top of it, and that ended up really helping it out. It made everything very flat and easy to put together. because of those 5 inches that were added, there is a little bit of a gap, but they end up fixing that with some leftover wood that they had. Now it is a little bit too wide and a little bit too long, so my dad just cuts off the excess and it ends up working perfectly fine. While my dad did that, my sister started to paint the panelings. We wanted to get a color that would blend into the background, so we went with the color Turbo Tan. This took a couple of days because, as you can see here, she started off with a primer that had to fully dry, and then we went in with the paint. Now my dad is starting one of these side walls. The reason that the wall is 35.5 instead of the 43 like the foundation is because they're going to connect to the back wall. It's a little bit hard to imagine right now, but later on in the video I do show you what I mean. What my dad is doing here is creating some reinforcement with extra lumber, just because again we don't have the proper tools and he wants to make everything as sturdy as possible, and he's not able to do that if everything is kind of wiggling around. This ends up working out really well, and if you don't have the proper tools, this is just a testament that with a little bit of creativity you can make just about anything work. Here you can get a better image of what I mean. As you can see, there's a little bit of a gap between the sheathing and the lumber, and that's just so that everything can connect. You'll see here that there is a gap, but that is filled later on with the door frame. Here's that door frame that I'm talking about. As you can see, it fills in the gap. They put on the door frame first and the sheathing after. In retrospect, they might have wanted to put on the sheathing first because it was very heavy and it made it a little bit difficult to get everything as even as possible. It ended up working out in the end, but I would recommend that you put on the sheathing before putting on the door frame. Now my dad is starting to install the lumber for the roof. There is a total of 4 55-inch lumbers being installed for this incline. I would be lying if I said this was not nerve-wracking to watch. You don't see us here, but my sister and I do get a hold of that ladder and we hold it as steady as possible the entirety of him being up there. That triangle gap that you guys see is later on filled with sheeting that they had left over. Then they got the sheathing on top of the roof. As you can see, there is a little bit of a gap, but that's later filled with sheathing that was left over. Now my dad is going to install the roof shingles. You are supposed to lay down a sheet before doing this, but we couldn't justify getting such a big sheet for this small project. And I think that because you are supposed to install that sheet before, we were recommended to get 3/4 galvanized roofing nails. We knew that that was going to poke out a little bit, so we opted out and decided to get 5/8 instead. Now my dad is installing the sheathing for the door frame. Again, I would recommend to cut the sheathing first and install that on the door frame and install that to the shed as one piece, especially if it's like ours and it's multiple parts. When it's multiple parts of sheathing, it gets a little bit hard to make everything perfectly even, but it does end up working perfectly fine in the end. Now the final step is to create the door, which I think is the most tedious and hardest part about building a shed. Because this door is going to have a little window on it, my dad cut out the big piece first and then went in on the little window. In hindsight, you might want to do the little window first just to get a good grip on it. Then my sister measured out the door frame for him to cut. This is a new saw that he bought for this project. He was previously working with a different one, but that one started to cut the lumber at an angle and it made everything twice as hard. He just decided to spend the extra money on a new tool, and this worked way better than the one that he was working with previously. Here is what it's looking like now. As you can see, there's a little bit of a line, but that gets covered up with the piece of wood. This plexiglass is not included in the total cost of the shed because this was given to my dad for free by a friend. We weren't sure how to install this at first, but then decided to make a little frame for it. That way there's no chance of it sliding out. After that was done, we flipped it over and added wood glue to a leftover wood that we had to be able to hide this line that you see here. And not only does it hide it, but it adds a little bit of character to the door. I did not record them putting on the door because again, it was very hard and tedious. For some reason, the measurements were a little bit off and the door wasn't closing. So my dad took this tool and kind of created a little gap in order for the door to close. For the door hinge, they decided to do this long one that covered the entirety of the door. I think it was probably better to do two separate hinges because this long one, you have to be very meticulous about how it's placed because it definitely alters how the door is affected. They also added a frame outside of the door. That wasn't necessary, that was just to add a little bit of character and cuteness to the shed. The final step is to install a latch. My dad did install this upside down, but at this point he was completely beat. This has taken several days and he has been working on it after already having a full day at work. So I'm really grateful that he was able to do this for me, as well as my sister. She is the one that was in charge of all of the measurements and products that were needed. In the end, she even organized the entire thing for me. I was quite nervous to make this video because this is not my normal content. I don't usually use my voice, but if this is something that you guys enjoyed, I am open to maybe incorporating it into my future videos. I am always trying to find ways to better my channel because this is something that I thoroughly enjoy doing, and I also want you to enjoy watching. So let me know what you guys thought down below, or give this video a thumbs up to let me know that you did enjoy this kind of content and want to see more. Last minute, my dad decided to remove any of the remains from the bush that was initially there, and that is because he is going to install a bench that he made for my mom about 3 years ago. The plan was always to grow a grapevine over it, but where the bench originally was, it didn't get sufficient sunlight. Now that it's moved over to this area, I'm really hopeful that we'll get grapes this year. Thank you guys so much for watching. Here I will link some of my previous videos for you to enjoy.